Hi, everyone. I'm John Lux. I'm the Executive Director of Film Florida, and welcome to another edition of Film Florida Friday. Film Florida Fridays are interactive conversations about current topics, initiatives, relationship building in Florida's film, television, commercial, and digital media production industry. Today, we're talking about intimacy coordinators. Who are they? What do they do? What training do they need? And how the role has changed in recent years. In a moment, our guest will introduce herself, and then I'll ask some questions to get things going. During that time, we're going to ask that everybody keep their microphones on mute to avoid background noise. As always, once we've gotten through initial questions, we'll open it up to the audience for questions and conversation. At that time, please use the hand raising function so we can call on you. The goal for this is to be conversational and interactive, but we don't want everybody talking at the same time. We're also going to ask people to try and keep their questions brief in the interest of time and out of fairness to others that want the opportunity. As always, Film Florida Fridays are free, but we hope you'll consider donating $20.22 to our 2022 fundraising campaign. The donation link will be posted in our chat box throughout, as well as on our website. And with that, I want to introduce our guest. Nicole Perry is with us. We had one other panelist scheduled to appear, but she was booked last minute, which of course happens in our industry. So it's just me and Nicole today. So with that, Nicole, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. Nicole Perry. My pronouns are she, her. I am based on the unceded land of the Seminole in Broward County, Florida. In addition to being an intimacy coordinator for film and TV, I'm an intimacy director, which means that I work in live performance as well. So I work in theater and opera and dance, and I also teach dance at the University of Miami. So I can be found driving a lot in South Florida if I am not in one place in particular. And I teach also for IDC, which is Intimacy Directors and Coordinators. I teach their Foundations of Intimacy course. And I work for the Dance Education Equity Association on teaching power and consent in the dance competition world, because if you have ever been in a dance competition world, if you thought the film world had some toxicity and power dynamic problems, the dance world is really special in that way. I'm really excited to be with you.
Excellent. Well, we're excited to have you and excited to have you introduce this role to our audience, because there hasn't really been much discussion about it amongst our group. So I'm glad that we're going to introduce something new. So let's start with the basics. What is an intimacy coordinator?
So an intimacy coordinator is someone who works in recorded media. So film, TV, streaming, web series, whatever, recorded media, creating scenes of nudity, simulated sex, or hyperexposure. And hyperexposure is a really interesting term because it means whatever you want it to mean. Everybody has a different threshold of what is exposure. So we usually talk about it in terms of any state of undress that you wouldn't show up to work in, because we're in a workplace whenever we're on a film set. So if you're going to be asked to be at work in a state of undress that's not how you came, you're exposed. So I always give the example of the dead body in the morgue in a Law and Order episode. There's really nothing sexy about that scene, but they are in a state of undress for the entire scene. So they may be feeling hyperexposed. But some other things that might be considered hyperexposure are breastfeeding scenes or childbirth scenes. Scenes where an actor has to perform like a panic attack or a trauma response might feel really exposing. If a character is taking off a religious garment, that might be hyperexposing to the character. And if the actor also has lived experience, might find that exposing. Personally, I always give the example of being on stage. Like, I am a dancer and I've done a lot of acting in theater. If you asked me to sing on stage, I would feel hyperexposed. I would want to know that there's someone who's there for me, cheering me on if I had to sing on stage, because I would personally find that extra exposing. So simulated sex, nudity, and then this really gray area of hyperexposure.
And talk in a general sense about your role on a project, like, just high level. We'll get into the weeds, but let's just start with kind of the high level part.
There are kind of three tenets of the work when I'm on set, and it's advocacy, choreography, and communication. So I like to say that I'm an advocate for the production, that I want to make good art. And in order to make good art, actors' boundaries have to be upheld. Actors have to feel super confident and clear on the things that they're doing. And the director's vision needs to be fulfilled in a way that we're telling the story that we've all agreed to tell. And sometimes those two things require some extra communication, and some communication from someone who is not the director to the actor, because those power dynamics can influence an actor to agree to something that they don't want to agree to. Or sometimes the other way around, but we usually think about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then choreography. This is a movement position, just like it's a stunt coordinator, and that's why we have the title coordinator. It's to be parallel to stunts. We create movement. I create choreography. This hand here, that hand there, 4 beats. We're going to move in circles or turn around or do whatever. It really is a choreographic position. And then every project is different. Some projects require a lot more advocacy and a lot less choreography. And some projects already have incredible communication, and I get to really be my movement professional self and create all the juicy hands-on bits.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, if I'm not mistaken, your role, your position is relatively new in the industry in an official capacity. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the position and the growth in recent years?
Yeah, so intimacy choreography as a term was first seen in 2004 when Tonya Sina was writing her master's thesis at VCU. And she started doing this work in theater, and she was a fight choreographer for theater, and she started doing this work for theater and finding some other folks who were doing similar work. And one of those people was Alicia Rodas. And so she and Alicia and Siobhan Richardson created an organization in 2014 called Intimacy Directors International, where they were training people to do this work. And Alicia was also at the time doing a lot of stunt coordinating. And she got called for The Deuce at HBO and said, hey, can you do some of these sex scenes? They would like some support and making sure that these sex scenes look really good and are safe. And Alicia said, yeah, this is definitely my thing. So Alicia Rodas was the first credited intimacy coordinator when the first season of The Deuce came out, which was actually 2018. So even though I would say like the work has been happening since like the beginning of theater, right? There have been body scenes in performance since we have had performance. People have been doing this work, sometimes great, sometimes not so great, since we've had performance. But the term really came into practice in the early 2000s, and then the role became something that people recognized in less than five years from now. It was 2018 was the first intimacy coordinator. And then soon after that, we had the first intimacy director on Broadway. And now the role is really not common, but growing in both film and theater senses, to the place that it is becoming a pop culture reference. There was an SNL skit about the intimacy coordinator on Bridgerton, who is a colleague and a wonderful human. Back in the early days of the pandemic, that skit came out, and the new show Reboot on Hulu actually doesn't have an intimacy coordinator, but had a whole section of an episode about the fact that they don't have an intimacy coordinator. So it's becoming part of pop culture.
Sure, that makes sense. And now, what might an intimate scene on set have looked like 10 years ago versus how it looks like now, with your position included as kind of a little bit more standard practice?
Yeah. It depends. It depends on the project, but the most common the most common scenario would be something along the lines of just go for it. And then they kiss. And getting really great, clear direction, like, could you be sexier? Like, no one knows what that means. Sexy is definitely a subjective term. So there's definitely some room for growth in the communication thing. And that's really what a lot of people were experiencing, that there just wasn't clarity around what was expected of them in the moment. And then they felt like they were failures, not only at their job as actors performing the sex scene, but like as a human being, a sexual being. Like thought I was sexy, and I guess I'm not.
Right.
So just go for it, or something along those lines is the most common scenario, I think, for actors to experience.
Well, and I'm assuming, that it kind of fell under the umbrella of, we want it to look natural.
Yes. We need authentic reactions, or like one person is getting one set of directions that the other person isn't getting, so that there's an authentic reaction.
Right. Okay. And so I'm assuming there's an official certification process or coursework that an intimacy coordinator must complete. What's that?
Yes and no. There are a couple of organizations in the States, and then some in other countries as well, that do an official certification process. There is a curriculum, there are set hours of training. And I originally went through IDI, that organization that I mentioned that started in 2014, Intimacy Directors International, and did their in-person trainings in 2018 and 19, and then was an apprentice. And then IDI dissolved in 2020, and IDC, where I teach now, didn't replace it, but has many of the same members of the IDI. So it looks the same. And IDC is seen as probably like the certifying body, but there are other certification groups in the States. And there really is a set course. There's a level 1 Foundations of Intimacy, where we get introduced to what is consent, what are power dynamics, and how do those play out in the entertainment industry, what is closure and why is it important for actors to have. And then we have a level 2, where we start to look at trauma-informed practices and looking more at choreography as storytelling. And then level 3 is an in-person choreographic practice, where you're doing those things with bodies in space. And then you have an apprenticeship, and then you are certified. I can only speak to what IDC certification process looks like, because it's the only one I know. It's the one I went through. But I know that there are others, and SAG has accredited a handful of training organizations that have said these organizations are doing what we expect an intimacy coordinator to be able to do. And it's supposed to be 200 hours of training. Wow. That includes all of those things that I've mentioned: power dynamics, consent, trauma-informed choreography. But then there's self-study work that needs to be done, like mental health first aid, anti-racism, LGBTQIA2+ activism, communication skills, nonviolent communication, bystander intervention, things like that. And you have to continue for both SAG accreditation and for my own certification at IDC, we have to continue to show professional development. So last week I went to a webinar that was hosted by an IC in LA on working on set with minors. Not that minors are involved in intimacy the way we think of it, but sometimes they are involved in those scenes of like hyper exposure. And we were talking about a scene where, the teenage daughter gets her period and she's in the bathroom, and they want to shoot the scene with the underwear around her ankles. So how do we make sure that the minor is protected, the production is protected, and we get to tell the story? So I'm constantly doing continuing education in like IC specific things, and next month I'm taking a mime class, not because I want to be a mime, but it's just another, it's another movement tool that I actually don't have. I've taken tons and tons of movement work in my life. I'm also a certified Laban movement analyst, but I've never taken mime. So I'm like, I'll just go take this thing that will give me some more movement tools and maybe help me connect to an actor who does really love that or move in this way or whatever. So there is an expectation, regardless of whether you are certified or not, that you have training absolutely in power dynamics and consent and how movement tells a story.
Okay. Now, for our audience here, normally we wait a little bit further to ask for any questions from the audience, but to break things up, since it's just Nicole and I this morning, if you have any questions, go ahead and start using the hand raising function, and we will call on you as we continue throughout here. But Nicole, so I want to go back to that a little bit. If somebody started today, not the professional development side of things, but just started today, how long would it take them to become certified?
I can only speak to IDC because again, it's the only one I
Right.
know. And I'm expecting that other ones are similar because there is a kind of baseline expected curriculum. That the first sort of 2 stages, those foundations of intimacy, take 3-ish months, provided that you could like sign up for a class that fits your schedule. And like we do our classes online, our first 2 levels online. So that takes like, they're 4 weeks and 6 weeks respectively. And you got to find the one that fits your schedule. But then the in-person part is application only. And we do read those applications for not only have you completed those foundational courses, but that you have done some self-study to fill in some of your own personal gaps, whatever those are. Like when I started with IDI, I had tons and tons of movement experience, but I didn't have mental health first aid. So that was like first thing on my list was go take a mental health first aid class and make sure that I had that certification. So when I applied to be an apprentice, that I had proof that I was working to fill my own gaps. So they're looking for those level 3 folks to have a good self-reflective process and be filling some of their own gaps, and to be ready for in-person choreographic work. Is when I certified, most everybody was coming to the work from movement. Like all of my colleagues that I graduated with that were in my cohort, we were almost all fight people. And there's a couple of us who are dance people, but most people came out of fight and stunts and then a couple of dancing folks. And now we're seeing a shift in people who are training that we are getting more actors. We're getting more people who have been on set in other capacities that are now interested in seeing this role in practice and are like, oh, this is a cool thing that I want to be a part of. And so they're coming in with some more of that knowledge, but actually not necessarily the movement knowledge, the choreographic knowledge. And so we're seeing some more people that need to fill those gaps. And then that in-person thing is 3 weekends in 3 months. So like a quarter of the year. But that has to fit your schedule because in person, it's in New York and you have to apply and be accepted.
Okay.
So theoretically, it could take you a year. Theoretically, it could take you a lot longer. And then even after you complete that, you still have to have a apprenticeship mentorship where you're out and you're working and someone's able to either observe your work in person or on Zoom or be able to see it once it comes out on Hulu and then sign off on your work like, yes, it's quality.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I would say minimum is a year.
Okay. Now I saw 2 hands, but then they went down. Christy, do you still have a question? You want to go ahead and unmute
well,
yourself?
I was going to ask, it's interesting with the dance background. You pretty much answered the question I was going to ask. It's interesting that the dance background is what that brings to the table for what you're able to do there. And I was going to ask, are most intimacy coordinators coming from that kind of background? So she definitely answered, but I guess another question I had, and maybe this would be addressed later in a specific question, but like, is it like in practice, literally like choreograph dance as in like place the hand here at this moment and pull back from the kiss at this moment, or is it so like in-depthly choreographed like that on your part?
It depends a bit on the project, because sometimes the director will say things like, I just want to see what they'll do.
Okay.
They do want that authentic reaction. And so in those cases, we might like set a container and talk to the actors about like what body parts are available for touch. You know, we're not going to touch genitals, but what would it feel like if they have had total access to your back? Would that work? And so then we might just kind of set like an improv score of, you can touch each other's back, you can touch each other's arms, you can kiss on the lips, no tongue, no open mouth at any time over these 10 seconds. And the director says it's 10 seconds and I've got my stopwatch and it's going to be 10 seconds and then we're done. So there might be like a score like that. So actors at least know what to expect and they don't have to make it up. Like that's not an actor's job to make it up. They came to be their character, not to be a choreographer. And if you're going to ask them to be a choreographer, you should pay them 2 salaries, and nobody wants to do that either. So like, don't ask them to do 2 jobs. But sometimes it is very, very specific, and particularly for scenes of simulated sex, we're pretty specific to make sure that everyone's genitals are protected and kept safe, and that we know what to expect, and that we know that it looks good. Because that's, I think, a concern of everyone doing a simulated sex scene, is that they want it to look natural and real, but also not feel like they would be embarrassed to have their friends or partner or whatever see that piece of work that they're doing. Like that's always my goal when I'm on set, is like, I want everyone to leave set feeling really good about the work they did that day and knowing that they did a good job. Like that's my goal, is that everybody feels really good about it. So we might have a really sort of casual but marked out plan, or we might have an incredibly specific choreographic, the kiss is 4 beats and your head goes right and your head goes left and this person pulls back first but they leave the hand. And
wow,
yeah,
fascinating.
Well, and a lot of that, I imagine it's okay to be a little it can either be choreographed or it can be spontaneous, but the most important thing is for everybody to know what the plan is to either be spontaneous or choreographed, because somebody is waiting for direction and then the director says like, oh, no, I wanted this to be spontaneous. Well, if you would have told them that from the very beginning, it would have been much easier to be spontaneous as opposed to waiting for somebody to give direction, right? So it's really about the communication.
yeah, just making sure that everybody's on the same page about what the expected action is and what the story is that we're telling. Because sometimes the script says something like, they kiss. And one person thinks like they kiss is a little peck on the cheek, and the other person thinks they kiss is like consuming their scene partner. So then there's this entirely different clash of motivations as they come together. And you're like, what happened?
Yeah.
And then that can make working relationships weird, and it could have just all been alleviated by talking about what's the story that we're going to tell and what's the way that we want to do that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that communication. Where do you come in a project? Well, it's just kind of 2 questions. Where ideally do you come in a project? Is it the writing stage, the pre-pro, the week before? Like, where should you come in versus a lot of times in reality, where do you come in a project?
Yeah, those are different things. I mean, ideally, as you are like writing your scene and someone's writing, like they have sex, they go, oh, I need an intimacy coordinator. And that would be ideal. The other second time that it really should happen is when you're hiring your team. It's like, oh, we're hiring a stunt coordinator. I wonder if we need an intimacy coordinator. Oh, we're hiring a dance choreographer. I wonder if we need an intimacy coordinator. That like, as you're hiring your other specialties, that's a good time to reevaluate the script and be like, do we need one of these? But lots of times it is not. Lots of times it is when they're in negotiations with actors and actors are asking, which is awesome. And actors should definitely know that they can ask for an intimacy coordinator, particularly for scenes of nudity, simulated sex, or hyperexposure. It is totally within your rights to ask if there's an intimacy coordinator, even as you're reading the script to audition, to ask if the project has one, because that might be the push that they need to do that. So often it happens when somebody has asked for one, or sometimes when a producer says, if we're going to give you the money for this kind of project, you need to cover your legal butt by making sure that you have someone on. And then there's always a fun, call 2 days before of like, are you free tomorrow? Can you come do this thing?
Sure.
There's
Sure.
sometimes those.
Well, and talk about the prep work that goes in for a day on set for you.
It depends on the scene, but I do always ask for a prep day because it takes work. So it starts with reading the script. I love to read the whole script. One, so I know how the scene fits in the story. What is the purpose of this moment for these characters? But also, sometimes there are moments in the script that stick out to me as an intimacy coordinator that maybe they haven't asked for. And like, if you're going to pay me a daily anyway to show up, you might want to get your money's worth. And if you have time to do these other scenes or shift these other scenes, or they're on your schedule anyway, you might want to look at that. Or if you're looking at that, this scene is actually super crazy too, because there's times that things don't get flagged, particularly that area of hyperexposure that people aren't thinking about. Oh yeah, childbirth scene, someone is really close to someone else's parts, and even though it's covered, like they're right there. And then there might be a baby. And are we going to see that real live baby's booty? And do we need to talk to their parents about that? So there are sometimes things that people don't think of as intimate that I'll flag and say, hey, we should talk about this. So I'll read the script and I have a whole big, beautiful spreadsheet that I'll fill out and then send back to them. And then they'll say, yes, we want this scene. We want this scene. We don't need those scenes. Cool. And then I'd like to talk to the director about what is the director's vision for these scenes. What do we have to see to tell the story that they want to tell? Or what is the story that they want to tell? And I might ask the director to share a storyboard if they have one, share any other like media clips that they might have, if that's something that they feel is important, either about what they want or what they don't want. I think I froze. Did I freeze?
No, we can still see you. Can you see me?
Okay, good.
Yep, we're good.
Everyone's just listening rapidly and it's very still. Excellent. Okay. So they might send me some other clips about like, I want it to look like this movie, but our own version, or I don't want anything like that. So we'll look at that and then I'll go to the actors. And the first thing I'll say to the actors is like, tell me about any boundaries, concerns, needs that you have about these scenes that we're working on, or tell me what you're seeing your character doing in this scene. And then once I get that information from the actors, then I know like, oh, this lines up really great with the director's vision, or the director said he really wants to see nipple and that's not going to happen. So I need to go tell them that's not going to happen. And then there's some extra communication back and forth. And then coordinating with costumes, wardrobe, hair, and makeup on who's supplying the modesty garments and the barriers. Sometimes it's me, sometimes it's them, sometimes it's a team effort. The last project I worked on, like they had the modesty pouches, but they didn't have any KT tape. So we doubled up and we had those choices available to them. So that coordination always happens. And then I have a closed set memo. So all scenes of simulated sex or nudity have a closed set, so only essential personnel. So I'll make sure that the first AD has that to send out on the prelim And then on the call sheet, so people are knowing, sometimes I do the safety meeting, sometimes the first AD does the safety meeting. And we want the crew to know what they're going to see and not see, because sometimes these things are upsetting to the crew, especially if it's like a scene of sexual violence. We're thinking about taking care of the actors, but we don't always think about the crew, and that there might be somebody on the crew that actually didn't come to work down for that day and was not interested in seeing that. And so letting them know, and also so they know how to like plan their day. Like, you're gonna have a closed set that day, so that's a great time to go have a soda and sit quietly somewhere else. So they can do that. But I think crew communication is really, really important, and just making sure that that happens for them.
Good.
And sometimes we get a rehearsal and sometimes we don't.
Yep.
And then there's lots of communication around that as well. Yeah, a lot of communicating and a lot of spreadsheets.
Good. Yeah. So audience, don't forget, if you have any questions, make sure you use the hand raising function, and we'll bring you down and so you can ask your question to Nicole. Now, Nicole, initially your partner in this panel was someone that you have worked with remotely, in the sense that she worked on part of a project up in Georgia. You worked on part of a project in Florida. Talk about that communication process amongst yourselves when you do have a situation like that, where you have to collaborate with another intimacy coordinator on the same project. Yeah,
that was my first time being like part of an IC team, which was really cool to know that there are others who are doing this together. And then our communication was very much around, what do we need these folks to know about our role? Because some of them had worked with an IC before and some of them hadn't. It was a big budget Netflix feature with A-list director and stars, and we wanted to make sure that we got what we needed so we could give them what they needed. But still, in our industry, most folks have not worked with an intimacy coordinator. So there was just a lot of communication of, hey, I'm hearing this thing from them, but I know that they need this thing. So this is what I'm going to tell them. And if when this comes up for you, can we back each other up? Or like, I'm experiencing this and this hasn't happened before. Are you getting that on your side? Because we also had similar but different contacts because we were in different cities. So it was really important to us that everyone involved in that film understood why our role was necessary, and that we presented sort of a united front of like, this is how a good intimacy coordinator handles things, that we do need the whole script and not just the scene, that we do need to talk to the director, even if it's just a quick 5-minute phone call that follows up their email that they sent saying these other things. Like, we really do need to talk to them to make sure that our questions get answered about the scene. And we do need to talk to the actors, even if it's just in their trailer right before we shoot. We want to be with them and not just meet them in the moment, so that they know what to expect. And so learning to just be really transparent about that. And then also having conversations about money and rates, and like, what do intimacy coordinators get paid? What should a production be budgeting for intimacy coordinators? And what can they reasonably expect for that kind of money? Good. I see we have one hand, Aniela. If okay, there you go. You added turned on your camera, so there's your spotlight. Go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Nicole, for being here and having this discussion. So my question is, I'm an actress. I mainly do film and television and commercials. And thankfully, or not thankfully, but a lot of the roles I do don't involve necessarily intimacy. And so I recently, about a year, right before the pandemic, did an audition for a theater, venturing in there. And the audition, they were going to have an intimacy coordinator for the actual production. But the audition, they did not have one there. And part of my reasoning for honestly backing out, I was in the callback process and I backed out after the audition, was because the guy in the scene, in the middle of the scene, goes to kiss. Like, and I'm having to move myself out of the way because we hadn't discussed it. And then the production, they all kind of laugh about like, oh, well, you know, you got to get it where you can. And I left that production just like, oh, I do not feel safe working with you all. And so I'm just wondering, what is the best, because it's hard in the middle of a scene to be like, whoa, like making a big scene in the middle of a scene about this. So what is your advice?
Thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry that was your experience. That is not what should happen. It should be best practice in both theater and film, that intimacy is not part of the audition. And actually for SAG, and I'll speak specifically to SAG for just a moment, nudity cannot be part of your audition. So actors on today, please know that for a SAG film, nudity cannot be part of your initial audition. And if they are asking for that, that is a huge red flag. It can be part of your callback process, but it can't be part of your initial audition. And I often use that because actors' equity for theater, even though this intimacy role is more familiar in theater and has a little more longevity in theater, actors' equity has not made quite as many rules or as many public statements about intimacy as SAG has. So it's a little wishy-washier when it comes to theater stuff, and not all theater is equity either. So I still put that forward as like a best practice of like, we don't ask for nudity and we don't ask for intimacy unless it's been discussed. And I don't think any of that needs to be seen before the callback. And when I'm working on productions, again, if I'm lucky enough to get in at the audition process, then I make that clear. And very often that late call happens in theater as well, where they're like, oh, we just suddenly realized that the script had nudity in it. I'm like, no one realized that today. So nudity definitely, and intimacy, as far as I'm concerned, should not be part of an audition. It could be part of your callback process if that's like a decision maker to them, but like chemistry is not something that exists. Chemistry is something that is made. That's why we have classes on it in high school, right? Like you make chemistry happen. You put this chemical in that chemical and stuff explodes. So chemistry is something that is made, and good actors and good directors and good intimacy coordinators can make that chemistry be true. And so if you want an actor, then you should hire the actor. And I think when you're reading a script, if it says in the audition side that there's a kiss or there's a whatever, that you can, when you confirm your audition, just say, I want to be clear, I'm not participating in any intimacy in the audition process, but I'm willing to discuss that for the callbacks, or not, if you're not. Or question, like, I see that there's intimacy in the side. Are you expecting that to happen in the audition process? And let them take the onus of that. Yeah, and if somebody makes a move, like that's a red flag. If someone does not ask for consent before contact, like they're not a person I want to work with.
Yeah. That was a great question. I actually hadn't thought about the audition process, so thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you. Thank you for having this. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. We do have another one. Alina, I'm gonna, if you want to turn your, oh, we lost that hand. If you still, Elena, do you still want to have your question?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Then Larry, let me add the spotlight. Come on down and ask your question.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. Obviously, we appreciate it. I was just wondering, it's like, since this is it's not like recent, but since it became an up-and-coming thing in 2014, 2018, is it like a rule requiring that there has to be an intimacy coordinator on set? Or is it more so like people just, if they're wanting to cover their bases, they add one? Is it like required?
Good question.
Great. I'm going to put some links in the chat as I answer this question. So this first one is from SAG. It's called Sex, Nudity, and You, but it's their 2020 contract update. So y'all have that. And even if I'm not working on a SAG production, I just always refer back to these as great guidelines. And then this one is SAG's quick guide to intimate scenes. So all these things are readily available, even if you're not a SAG member, but I have these bookmarked all the time to send to people and be like, can you please look at this thing? It is not a requirement to have an intimacy coordinator from SAG. It is a recommendation in scenes of simulated sex and nudity. It's currently not required, but it is recommended. What is the difference? I don't particularly know. Is it going to be required? I could see that going either way in the future, honestly. It is required for SAG that you let actors know that there are scenes of simulated sex and nudity in their track. And it is required by SAG that nudity riders be signed 48 hours ahead of shooting so that actors have time to prepare themselves for that nudity and that level of nudity, and they're not pressured on the day to do something that they don't want to do. So those are things that are required, but having an intimacy coordinator isn't required. Lots of folks are, because they're seeing that it makes storytelling clearer. It takes something off the director's plate that then they can just go focus on this other thing because they know the intimacy coordinator's got that.
Mm-hmm.
An actor has asked for one and it makes them happy and they want their actor to be happy. A producer has said you have to have one and they'll make sure that there's money to cover it, but they want to protect their investment. So there is a variety of reasons from financial to artistic to have one, but it is currently not a requirement.
Damn. Okay.
Great.
Thank you. I appreciate you answering that.
All right. Thanks for the question. Nicole, how did COVID-19 change the role?
And personally, I was not working in film before COVID. I was doing intimacy direction only for theater. And then there was no theater in Florida during COVID. But there ended up being a lot of independent films coming here because Florida had less rules,
Right.
a lot less rules than other places. So we ended up with some indie stuff that we might not have had otherwise. So that's actually when I started working in film, was in 2020. It changed the role in terms of things I put in my kit. Instead of just having mints for bad breath, I now make sure that I have several kinds of mouthwash, so that there's like the hydrogen peroxide based one that your dentist might use that's supposed to be, you know, your dentist is using it now instead of the other ones, but there's also concerns about what that does to your gums, but like you're not chugging it, so whatever. It's just mouthwash. I have lots of mouthwash so that people feel like bacteria is being killed, not just their breath is being freshened. And like mouthwash all the time. We do more mouthwashing now than we did before. And also people's comfort level with touch and what is considered intimate. We've actually, I think as this industry, had a little more recognition that intimate scenes aren't just sex scenes, because some people have not been in contact with another human being for 2 years.
Right.
Or have not had intimate contact with another human being for 2 years, or intimate contact with anyone outside of, you know, their live-in partner. They haven't been on a set. And so our ideas of what people's comfort levels are with touch and with intimacy, I think have become more open and more gracious. And now we're looking at some of these scenes of hyperexposure and going, yeah, I could see how someone would actually want an intimacy coordinator here for this scene of cuddling or hugging or breathing in each other's essence, even though there's no kissing because you're right on top of each other. So I think that that's been a big shift, that we are becoming a little bit more aware of what folks feel is intimate.
That makes sense. Yeah. Cameron, if you want to turn your camera on, I can spotlight you and bring you down. Otherwise, there you go. All right, there you go. Go ahead and ask your question. Make sure you unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you for being here. Lots of great information. I did have one question. Do you have any resources for low budget or micro budget productions that are looking for intimacy coordination, but might not have the money to afford it, but can also find money too?
To me, it's really important that any film that wants an intimacy coordinator gets an intimacy coordinator. I would 1000% rather work in a place where I am wanted and only getting paid this much than work on a production where the producer has said you have to cover your legal butt and so she needs to be here, and I'm literally sitting in the corner just yelling out, hey, they said you can't touch that part of their body. It's the worst. It's my least favorite. So like I hate being the babysitter on stage or on set. So I would rather be somewhere where I'm wanted and make a little less than make a ton of money being annoyed all day. So, and I think a lot of intimacy coordinators feel that way, that we want folks who want the work to have it. So I have a sliding scale. It's like I have my SAG daily rate, but my SAG daily rate is not what I asked for low budget indies. And I've been doing an hourly rate, and I'm just now starting to play with instead looking at crafting rates based off of content, because to me, it's also very different to create a 60-person orgy than it is to create a kiss. Mm-hmm. One of them requires far more prep and work and planning and communication than the other one. And to charge the same hourly rate doesn't actually take that into account. So I'm looking at making that shift too. Like if an indie film doesn't usually have a 60-person orgy, because that would cost some money. But so yeah, call me and we'll figure it out.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Cameron. Any other questions from the audience? Just go ahead and raise your hand. We'll keep going with some of our pre-planned questions. And now, Nicole, have you found that your role that you need to advocate for the talent you're working with, or sometimes are you advocating for the production because you understand the creative vision and you're just trying to help the actor get in a place where they're comfortable with that vision? I mean, how does that? I mean, you actually mentioned earlier that you're a bit of the middle person. Like, where is that kind of tug of war when you're advocating for both in a sense?
Yeah, and that's why I like to think like I'm an advocate for the production. I'm here to make sure we all make the art that we want to make, and that we all feel good about it at the end of the day when we leave work. And so 98% of the time, that means making sure actors' boundaries are upheld. And actually 100% of the time, it means making sure actors' boundaries are upheld. But sometimes there's more conversation about how do we get to there. And it's like, I hear that you're saying that you don't want to have anyone touch your chest tissue. Solid. Does it work if a hand is here? If a hand is here, what constitutes your chest tissue? So we can get like really particular in that. And like the director is saying the reason that they want this hand here is because of this reason for the character. And I think that's always really important information. If the director is like, oh, I really want this touch because I want to see them connected, you know, at their heart, or I want them to feel their breath. And so I want to see a hand here. Oh, that's really good information for me to have. If it's important for you to know that the characters are connecting on a breath level, what if we just see that? What if there's self-touch? What if we shift the camera and it's now on their faces and we can see them breathing in each other instead of down here? So sometimes it means getting to the reason behind something and not just the aesthetics of it. Like, we want to see this, cool, but why? What's the story part that we're telling? You know, and sometimes it means reminding actors that we're like on a schedule. That's been the time most often that I have been sort of like the production advocate, like, hello friend, you've had your waiver and it's due at this date. Are you going to sign it or not? Are there concerns around what's in this waiver that are keeping you from signing it? Because I want to address those and I want to get it done. But if we don't have it in the 48-hour window, we can't shoot, or we can't shoot without asking SAG for an extension. And so we'd like to make sure that we're ready to go. And I think it's never, if I'm on the production side instead of the actors, it's almost always about schedule. Just making sure that like paperwork gets turned in time, because also actors don't usually have that top of mind. That's not their first concern in the project. And sometimes they don't always have the communication either. It's like gone through an agent that it's gotten lost in their email, and it requires going back and having that kind of conversation of like, where did the email go? No one knows. So sometimes that happens. But when it comes to what the actor is willing to do, I'm always going to champion what the actor is willing to do. Like, it's never going to be like, well, the director wants this and they're insisting on it. Sometimes I do have to be the person that says the director wants this and they're insisting on it, and so they're going to use the body double clause in your contract. Sometimes I do have to be that person where it might look like, you know, I'm on the production side because the actor's no longer in that scene, but the actor's no longer in that scene because that's not what the actor wants to do. And they fully have the right to not do what they want to do. So I am always going to uphold actor boundaries. And sometimes that means that we have hard conversations about like what's in the contract and the fact that the production is going to go with someone else. Or sometimes it means I have to be like, hey, 48 hours is coming fast. What's happening?
Have you ever, I mean, worst case scenario, have you ever had a situation where you just can't find a resolution, and then what happens?
Thankfully not. We've gotten very close. We've gotten very close. There have been many stressful phone calls, but we have never had that happen. Everything has always had a resolution that even if people didn't feel like amazing about, they understood why the resolution was what it was. And I think that's really important too. And that's part of informed consent. You should know there is a body double clause in your contract, and that the production could choose to do that if you don't want to do the thing that the director is insisting has to be done. You should know that that's available, and that's not always clearly communicated either. And like, yeah, it's in the paperwork, but who really reads the paperwork? So being able to have those conversations so that like you have a good understanding of what the consequences of your choices are, and that you have choices, that you can choose to not do the thing because you have a body double clause in your contract, and it will be fine, and no one will be upset if you want to use your body double clause because it's already in the contract, and that's a choice that you have too. So it's really about, again, that communication part, making sure that everybody understands the choices that are available to them, and that the actors' boundaries are always going to get upheld, and we're still going to tell the story that we want to tell.
And I don't, it doesn't sound like you've ever had this situation, but I mean, I wonder if there are situations out there where actors get into a scene and, you know, the direction has them doing one thing and they're not comfortable with it. And somebody wants to say like, this has been in the script the entire time. Did you not actually read the script? How do you not know this is what we're about to do? I mean, do you think that ever happens?
Yes. I have had that happen in theater where they've been like, this was in the script, so I don't know why they didn't do it. I'm like, well, yeah, sure, it's in the script, but then they're there on the day, and this happens particularly in like indie stuff. They're the only woman on the set, the only one, and they're expected to be topless. And they didn't know that when they agreed to do the role. That feels very different than reading it on a page.
Absolutely.
And so I think the idea of the script is only one part of the context of what we're actually doing in that day.
That's great clarification. Okay, audience, this is the last call. If anybody wants to raise their hand, because we're getting close to the end here. Nicole, this is such a new position in the industry. Do you find that there are misconceptions about the role and what it entails when you speak either like to the general public or to the people in the industry?
Yes. People in the industry feel usually very strongly one of two ways about it. Either they assume that I am the sex police and I am no fun, and that I'm going to make the show the boringest thing they've ever seen, or they're so excited that I'm there and oh my God, where have you been all my life? So those two feelings come up. In the general public, if they've heard of an intimacy coordinator, I am the most interesting person to them. They have lots and lots of questions about what that entails. Or the conversation is, oh, do you work in porn? Because that is usually where that goes. It's not usually, oh, what is an intimacy coordinator? There's an assumption that I work in adult films. So, and adult films actually do not have intimacy coordinators for the most part, but some more feminist ones are starting to bring that on and make that part of their work. But an
That's a whole nother
coordinator typically just,
edition of Film Florida Friday.
yeah, like we work in simulated sex, so it's usually not where we work. I want to invite Landon, if Landon has anything to add in, because I actually worked with Landon on a project over the summer. So Landon was an actor that got to work with an intimacy coordinator. So just, if Landon has any thoughts about what that's like from the actor side.
Not to
Sure.
put you on the spot or anything.
Oh yeah, it's okay.
I warned him, it's consent.
It was, yes, exactly. She asked first. So no, it was really interesting. So Nicole was the very first intimacy coordinator that I had ever worked with. And I will say it was really great, because I think all the things that she's brought up were exactly what goes on when people don't understand what the role of an intimacy coordinator is. They thought, oh, you're just here to make the sex look good or not make the sex look good or whatever. So it was really interesting to watch. For me, fortunately, I didn't have any of the simulated sex scenes. Mine got cut out of the film, but I was there because I was part of that story. So it was really, to me, fascinating watching Nicole work, both with the director, with the AD, with like everybody else that was on the crew side, but then also being able to communicate with the actors that were doing the more intimate stuff. And just, I've talked to a couple of people after. To me, I think Nicole is an interpreter, right? So she's doing exactly what she says, like, okay, here's what we want to do. Here's what the actors are being asked to do. And how do we build that bridge so that everybody feels good at the end of the day? And it's very funny. It was comical and fascinating to me because it really is choreography. It's like, okay, actor, so now you're just going to make a circle with your head, or you're going to draw this number with your nose. And you think, oh, that's ridiculous. But then you watch it and you're like, well, no, that looks real good. And so it was really fun. So I really enjoyed meeting Nicole and talking to her and learning a little bit more about it, and then being able to work with her on that project, which comes out in just a couple days. And I'm really excited about seeing how it all turned out.
Well, there you go. There's the testimonial, everybody.
Yeah.
So, thanks,
I
Landon.
see.
That was fun.
Thank you, Landon. Yeah, it is always really interesting to see
right.
that happen.
All right, last call, anybody. Do we have any last questions? All right, Christy, you got one more. All right, we're gonna
The questions
add you down
person,
here.
Christy.
There you go.
I actually, and look, it's not really a question. I just wanted to say it out loud here towards the end that like, I really didn't know anything about the mental health part and even like the physical health part. And I really don't understand how the industry got by without this position in the past. Like, this is fascinating. I didn't know how much went into it. So I just wanted to note that it's very interesting.
It is a lot. And I want to also just make sure that's clear. That's like, we have mental health first aid training, but we are not therapists or first responders. Like,
just that it goes into it. I am fascinated by that.
Be prepared. And there is, a move in the industry to start to have cultural competency consultants regularly on productions and mental health consultants regularly on productions, which would be a different role. And I'm excited about those because I think those are really necessary too. And sometimes they do end up being part of the work that I do, but maybe should be their own role. And I see we have a couple things in the chat. Question about the body double. Does the body double need an intimacy coordinator? Yes, because it's the same character and they're still doing the simulated sex or the nudity or the whatever. So even like if there may be a non-SAG person replacing a SAG person, yes, I still work with them in the exact same way. They get the same conversations, they get the same attention. Sometimes even more because they are less likely to have worked with an intimacy coordinator before. And if they're a body double, there's also a little more power dynamicness there, that they might feel like, oh, I took this gig and now I definitely can't say no to anything that they want me to do. And like, I thought it was this, but now it seems like it's this. So definitely the body double gets the same thing. And
Well,
Brian,
and Nicole,
yeah.
I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I think the mental health thing that you mentioned, I think is so key to this. And even though you're not, you know, an expert in it, you can't, I mean, this is just my opinion, so tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think you can have one of these scenes physically be as good as it can be on screen or on stage if the people aren't mentally comfortable with it. And so that's where the two just play hand in hand 100%, right?
I think so too. Like, actors do their best art making when they are feeling confident about what their job is. And if they're feeling like they need to make it up, then half of their energy is going to making it up instead of being the character. And if they're getting directions like, just go for it, could you be sexier, can you make it hotter, then they're also trying to figure out what that means and do that instead of being the character. And if their brain is going, does my scene partner think I'm weird? Is this weird for them? It's kind of weird to me, but it's what we're supposed to do, but are they okay? And they feel like they can't talk about that. Or they start to have like feelings, because our bodies don't know the difference. Like, the same lips that we use to kiss our partner are the lips that we use to kiss someone on set. And it goes to the same nerve endings and creates the same biological responses, because the same body. And then suddenly they start to have feelings and they're like, oh my God, I'm wrong, I'm bad. Or do I really like this person? I didn't know I like this person. Maybe I like this person. And then to not have someone to be like, yeah, totally normal.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the job, and this is what we're doing. And we're going to make sure that we have barriers in place, and we're doing this, that, and the other. And we're interrupting the kisses with mouthwash so that we shut down some of those biological responses that then cause mental spirals about how we're doing our job and how our scene partner is perceiving us. And we're just professionalizing a very weird process.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Well, I mean, I think that's a great way to wrap up another edition of Film Florida Friday. We want to thank Nicole for being with us, and thank you so much for doing it by yourself, because that was not necessarily the plan, but we know, you know, the show must go on, right? So we'll be back next month with another edition of Film Florida Friday. We're going to be talking about production assistance. So be on the lookout for that registration link on social media and through email blast. I want to thank all of our Film Florida members, as always, for their continued support, including Nicole. If you're not already a member of Film Florida, we hope you'll consider joining at filmflorida.org. If you enjoy Film Florida Fridays, please consider donating the $20.22 for our 2022 fundraising campaign. That link is in the chat box or on our website. Keep up with everything we're doing on social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And make sure you're listening to the Film Florida podcast, expanded this year on a number of new platforms, Apple, Spotify, Podbean, Pandora, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google, and probably a couple more that I'm not even aware of. So thanks everybody for being here. Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you all.